Friends, and welcome to another edition of Transformational Astrology. I'm Henry Seltzer, and we're going to talk about this new moon coming up, and guess what? It's a transformational new moon. You've probably heard me say that before. We've had Saturn-Pluto from the beginning of the year, when it actually was a couple of degrees away from a lunar eclipse on the 10th of January, just at the same time when COVID was named as the right name for this new disease caused by this novel coronavirus, COVID-19. And sure enough, I can associate that Pluto-Saturn combination, which has been getting closer in recent months, and also the T-square from Eris to Haumea has been very strong in recent months. So I was associating that with a rise in the COVID situation over the summertime, a couple of months before it happened. And sure enough, it did. I was thinking, well, they say that being reckless about opening could lead to higher spike, and sure enough. Well, the thing I have to say to you tonight is that we're looking at another spike coming. So I really believe, and you can see some of the evidence already. They're talking about a lot, even worldwide. In Europe, they're seeing spikes. So there's definitely an increase in hospitalizations recently. Some cities have hospitals that are full. They're not dying so much, although we are seeing 800 deaths a day, 700 to 800 deaths a day in the United States, which is still a lot. And interestingly, the Trump administration is kind of going, I know the irreverent progressives are calling Republicans the party of the virus. But anyway, they are saying it's just fine to get COVID. Trump is tweeting about how healthy he feels now that he's had it. It's a great blessing. And don't worry about it because you might get sick, but you probably won't die. Well, it can be very deadly and dangerous, though. And I believe that the health experts are right. If you poll the epidemiologists, similarly, if you poll the climate change people, climate change scientists, you get a pretty huge preponderance of evidence that climate change is a factor of all the greenhouse gases. We have basically 1 decade, 10 short years, to reverse the climbing and start to lower the rate of fossil fuels, greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere if we want to keep the climate somewhat stable. Otherwise, sea level rise gets out of control, acidity in the oceans gets out of control. We're seeing a lot of wildfires in California. 7 of the 8 last most hottest Septembers have been in the last 7 years. Those are the I think it's 7 out of the 8 hottest ever months, and including, I think this past September was maybe setting another record for the hottest September, at least here in the United States. I don't know where the statistic comes from. I believe it's maybe U.S. oriented, but that's the stark news, and it's just time that we paid attention to the epidemiologists and we paid attention to the climate change people and tried to get some of these things under control. It's an invisible enemy. We can't see it. We can only follow the advice that comes to us intellectually through the scientific channels and do social distancing, wearing masks. I have a mask with me. I'm not wearing it right now because I'm talking to you in a room by myself. But I do wear the mask. Here in Santa Cruz, California, we have to. You can't go into an establishment without wearing a mask. Social distancing. We're starting to do restaurants at 25% capacity and social distancing, and I guess that's working. I think if everybody pays attention. And one of the great things about the mask is it causes you to pay attention. It's like, oh, I've got the mask on. Why is that? Because it is a dangerous situation. Everybody's got to distance and be careful with their breath, droplets, and even aerosol emissions from the breath. So I think we all know, but we're not really doing much about it. And then the Trump administration is kind of letting go of the idea of doing anything about it, but I think that's a mistake on their part. So without further ado, that was a long intro, but let's take a look at the chart for the new moon. Libra new moon coming up tomorrow, Friday, October 16th. So here's the chart. And you should be able to see this now. We're looking at an Aries-oriented chart, the natural chart. what's rising on the west coast at the time of the new moon tomorrow at 12:30 p.m. Pacific time, which is 3:30 p.m. Eastern time, and something like 9:30 p.m. or 8:30 p.m. in Europe, parts of Europe. We have different risings in all those different locations. In the west, the ascendant happens to be right in Sag, near the south node, but that's only for our time zone, so we just use a natural chart. And in the natural chart, we do see that Eris is still sitting there. It moves so slowly, 1/4 of a degree a year on average. If you look at the subsequent stations, like stations direct, let's say, which is coming up, it's retrograde now, and the next station direct is coming up actually in January, on January 10th. At 23, so it's only going to be 1 degree back at 23 degrees of Aries. Well, across the way, across the zodiac, we have the new moon at 23 degrees of Libra right now, so it's pretty close opposition. In fact, 23 degrees and only 7 minutes of a degree away from 24, so that's about 24. Here is Eris at 24, and well, 24-0, I guess, by the time tomorrow rolls around. And here we have also Saturn and Pluto. Only 3 degrees separate them. And if you look at the midpoint here, adding 1.5 degrees to the 22.5 degrees mark, it's very close to 24 even. So these are very close aspects between the center of, or the midpoint of the Saturn-Pluto and Eris opposed to the new moon. Mars nearby at 20, which is adding to it. It's very close. Makes a 22 degree mark if you look at the midpoint there. Well, that's the degree of Pluto. Another factor in all this is Haumea still in the T-square with Eris, and only 4 degrees separate that from the new moon. So the new moon lights up Haumea. Now what does that tell us? Haumea is an earth energy. It has to do, it's the creation goddess of Hawaii, and it's a representation of nature, which is always changing, always growing, always bringing forth new forms. That's exactly the model of the creation goddess, that she gave birth from all different parts of her body, regenerated again as a young woman, had a magic wand that could make food appear, which is the state of the biological nature of the Hawaiian Islands. Great food growing on trees everywhere. And you know, it's nature itself, and it does seem to have that connection. People with a close aspect to Haumea in their natal chart really need nature as a relief, as a comfort, depending on the planet involved, different things. And Maki Maki is similar. These are the two new ones. Maki Maki looks a little bit like a birdman. Haumea looks a little bit like a pregnant lady. They're both variations on the Pluto glyph, and they travel around the same speed. Pluto's 248-year period, whereas these guys are 284 and also 309. So, which is Maki Maki actually is the slower moving. So anyway, there you have it. Maki Maki in partile opposition to Chiron. That brings up some interesting thoughts about climate change, the painful situation with climate change, and the necessity for action on climate change, because Maki Maki, also very closely connected to nature and to indigenous peoples, being the creation god of the Rapa Nui people for Easter Island, is actually also definitely a nature-oriented planet, nature-oriented planetary archetype, which has also the notion of activism involved in it. For example, you see with somebody like Greta Thunberg, has Eris exactly partile, quincunx, to Maki Maki in a tight formation with Mars that results in a yod to Eris from Maki Maki and Mars. And sure enough, she's climate change, I could say fanatic, you know, I mean, she's very dedicated and has that Eris tendency to be a warrior for her cause. You know, it's a spiritual warrior Eris, feminine warrior for soul intention, finding out what only you can say is your deepest bottom line values and acting upon that. Finding your authenticity by going deep inside to know what it is that you're here for, what it is that you truly need to accomplish, that you need to bring forth. So seeing these two in opposition to each other, it really has something to do, and you see the 27 degree mark also chimes pretty well with Saturn. And the midpoint of these two is also 25, which is Saturn. Saturn degree is 25 degrees of Capricorn. And we have Uranus opposite retrograde Mercury in Scorpio. And we have Venus opposite to Neptune in Pisces. And in fact, Jupiter is lollygagging around here in Capricorn, just having turned direct, moving quite slowly, is in a perfect sextile and a trine to Venus. So, you know, these are very interesting times. You know, the Chinese saying, may you live in dangerous times. May you live to see things change. And the interesting times that we're in right now is definitely fraught with danger, fraught with sickness, fraught with economic difficulties and social difficulties and COVID isolation. But it's also fraught with opportunity, because it's only when things come, when push comes to shove, as they say, that the real change is possible to happen. And we're seeing a huge societal shift in this decade, in this year that begins the decade, so that you can really see it happening. You know, the Black Lives Matter movement had so much more traction than ever before. People are just like, no, enough. We need justice. We need balance. We need harmony. We need treating people fairly, treating people as the little godlike beings that they are, that everybody on this earth, all humans, are part of my own body. And I have to act that way. I have to preserve them. In the Bible, Jesus says, do unto others, and says something about, if it's happening to the least of these, it's happening to me. And I think we just need to recognize that and just come out of the shadow. You know, I mean, we've been caught up in the shadows of greed and commerce and dark money and power-hungry, ego-driven behavior that really is the shadow, you know, and it's time to just transcend it. And that's what Saturn-Pluto, meaning the great transformation, the great structural transformation of our society, that's what that's about, this whole season. And we do see, like I say, this is a very powerful new moon here with the T-square, including the sun and moon. Next time, it'll be at the 23 mark, I think it is 23 of Scorpio. So still, it's a sextile, but it's still, that's the November 14th, the late night 14th, November 15th. That's only 30 days away, and that is the triple conjunction, even more pronounced because Jupiter catches up to Pluto. Saturn moves on a little bit ahead, but you still have that square to Eris. So anyway, this is when we were foretelling, you know, several years back, that November would be an intense time. It should be a very intense time politically, I believe, with the transition, the election results, and the transition, and the lawsuits, and the possible court cases, and so on, and the possible demonstrations against not letting the will of the people prevail, you know, because everything's going to be on the table. There's things that everybody's going to try, I'm pretty sure. And we have up until the end of the year that way, so including December is when it comes to this mark, the 23-degree mark roughly, or 20, might be 20 at that point, of Sag. So anyway, all these new moons basically are chiming in to this Saturn-Pluto triple, really, with Jupiter now catching up to Pluto. And it's intense. It's intense. And it's intense for each one of us individually. You know, we talk a lot about the mundane astrology, you know, what's happening with the society, but really it's each one of us individually that makes that happen. You know, it's the individual that makes the societal shift when you take the sum total. And it's like a hologram. Each individual, the vibrations go out. If you're acting upon your deepest principles, if you're in your most authentic self, if you're, you know, holding up the banner for what is right, you know, what your instincts tell you is natural law, as represented by Haumea, nature and natural law, you do see that you can take your power and you can be more complete. And at least you can say, I've done what I can do, I'm doing what I can do. And take that values, those deep values, and act upon them, articulate them to others, put your actions where your deep values lie. Now, it's interesting that we see these other outer planets as well. What do we make of so much Neptune? There's such strong Neptune in the sky right now, with this opposition to Venus, with this sextile to Jupiter. Jupiter and Neptune is an expansive factor. Right now, it is the closest that it's going to be in sextile to each other. And it's not quite perfect, but it's close. It's only half a degree, really, you know. And what do we know about Neptune? So Neptune brings the spiritual side of the events in. The fact that Neptune and Uranus are in combination. There is a septile, which is a 51-degree, 23-minute aspect, which is a seventh of the circle, between, and it's less than a degree. You can put the mouse on the time passages software and see how close it is. I'm reading down at the status line there, it says 0.08. I'm sorry, 0.8, 0.8. So less than a degree separates these two in terms of a septile, which is kind of a subtle and a little bit dark and occult connection between these two planets. Well, we do associate, though, Uranus with Neptune is very strongly associated with the birth of new religions in the past when they've been in combination by conjunction or opposition. It is a spiritualizing influence where you can see something new coming in, Uranus, that has a spiritual component to it and is therefore takes us out of our just physical lives and our personal ego lives to a transcendent of that, to a transpersonal situation where we can see that, as they used to say in the Middle Ages, in the great chain of being, there's more than meets the eye, there's more than what we see around us in a physical sense. There's a lot that's beyond that that we can tune into. And it goes into our deep unconscious, which is there below the level of conscious awareness, maybe more vast and more full of activity and dreams that come to us in the middle of the night, that we can get a vision of that. Symbolism that, you know, represents the archetypes of the inner being that Jung was so good at pointing out. And you can pay attention to those and you can learn more about yourself and you can be more whole as a human being, was what Jung thought, that the process that Jung espoused of individuation would bring you into a better and more whole balance between your outer ego self and your inner drives that are less obvious, that are more unconscious drives, and get those lined up with each other so you can actually have a bridge between the conscious and the unconscious self. Well, all of that is in play. All of that is happening as we evolve, as we transform, because this transformative nature of Saturn and Pluto together really brings us into the notion that we have to be constantly changing, constantly evolving. That's life. Life itself is change. Bob Dylan said it best. He said, everybody not busy being born is busy dying. So you got to be, you're changing one way or another, and you might as well make a positive change. And that means in some cases leaving something behind. You know, that's what Pluto's all about, is you have to leave something behind, maybe habit patterns that you've outgrown, maybe material objects that you've outgrown, maybe relationships that it's time to end, something new comes along. There's all kinds of change happening within us that we have to just recognize. What is the right change? Is it something that's not supposed to change? I have to hold steady and keep what I have, or is it something that's supposed to change and I have to move into the new stage, the new event horizon, see what's around the bend. So that's what we're up to, and we just have to honor the process. We can honor our intuition, represented by Uranus, by the way, opposite Mercury, by the way, which is the beginning of the retrograde period of Mercury, just stationed a couple of days ago at 11 degrees 40 minutes, so very close to this. It's moved half a degree since then, since Tuesday. And this is for Friday, of course. So 3 days. So anyway, we're in the soup, you know, we're in the midst of this. And Uranus is there. We're going to see even more surprises. There's been a lot of surprises. I mean, I saw a cartoon. It was in the New Yorker magazine, political cartoon. And it was a guy watching TV, and you could see the reactions to 6 events that are described in succinct terms as what the TV is saying. Oh, we got to interrupt for a new breakthrough. We've got new breaking news. President Trump has COVID. Oh, President Trump is out of the hospital. You know, there's all these boom, boom, boom. you can't believe the succession of events that is just coming down upon us. And that's a lot of Uranus. Uranus was combined with Eris precisely in conjunction during the summer of the 2016 campaign that led to the election of 2016 and the surprise, surprise, sort of like a jack-in-the-box, isn't it? Burp, surprise, Trump presidency. So anyway, we're seeing all of that coming down and coming together and coming out, and what's going to happen, who knows? And we also have the spiritualizing influence of Neptune, which is really important. It's also important to be discerning because Neptune also rules self-deception, over-idealization, and deception placed upon us by others. Everybody's talking about what's fake and what's news. Which is the fake news? Which is the real news? What's the true? We don't know, do we? I mean, you can't tell by reading the internet, that's for sure. You can't always tell by listening to the cable news because everybody's got a bias. And so you have to use discernment. That's the only way through. And it's that time. It's time for the most active presence of discernment, of recognizing what's deep inside you and acting upon it, coming to your moral truth, coming to your truth of your being and what that means you have to do. Sometimes people have to sacrifice and they recognize that this is what I am called to do. Look at your first responders. There's people dying here. I have to go help them in the emergency room. There's people dying here, or structures being destroyed. I have to go fight this fire. And they rise to the occasion. You see it every day now, everywhere. And it's up to all of us to do that. The funny thing about this pandemic, represented again by the Saturn-Pluto, that's why I say it's going to get worse in the winter, is that, Eris is involved in all this. Eris is taking individual responsibility. Eris is, guess what it's up to keep the spread of COVID down? Each individual. Guess what it's up to see what happens with the next presidency in the United States? Each individual. Everybody's got to vote. Everybody's got to take a stand. Everybody's got to do what they can do. And that's the situation we find ourselves in. This fine October month, in this fine 2020 year, which is, as I once heard an activist during the Vietnam War era say about Vietnam, Vietnam, he said, is such a jewel. And it was a terrible, terrible disaster, and many people died, but it was a consciousness-raising, miraculous time in this country. And here we got another one. So fasten your seatbelts, and we've got a 60-day run till almost the end of the year that's going to be pretty intense. And then I think it eases off in the spring. And maybe that's a sign that the vaccine comes around by then and gets distributed by then. Of course, what they say is, it's not the vaccine we need, it's the vaccination. So let's hope that it becomes available and that people can start to ease up. Some of the restrictions get more relaxed by spring and summer. Light at the end of the tunnel. So let's transition back. So I hope that was helpful. I mean, my whole thing here is to try to be helpful, to try to explain as best I can what I see happening in the sky as it relates to what's happening below, as above, so below. And to try to make the best sense out of it. Really there's no such thing, astrologers say, as a bad planet. There's no such thing as a bad transit. Difficult, maybe yes, but not evil. There's always an opportunity hidden within the darkest time to rise above, to do what you can, to make the sacrifice you need to rise to the occasion. And that's what we're all faced with right now, is really just exercising that, being the best version of ourselves, the best person that represents the most authentic version of yourself that you can possibly be. So good luck with all that. One quick, do we have any questions that came up during the talk? Or?
Nope, I don't believe we do. We could take a few minutes to see if anyone wants to ask.
No, I think that's perfect. This was a good amount of time getting to a good close, so I'll leave it there. We'll talk later. Best of luck, my friends. See you soon.